Hey, what's up, guys? Tom Henderson from RESGEN here, and I want to welcome you to this episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Real quick, before we jump into the show today, I want to let you know that tickets for RESGEN Men's Summit 2025, which takes place on Saturday, February 1st from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., are on sale now at resgen.org. This annual RESGEN event gathers over 1,100 men right here in Sioux Falls and thousands more online and at simulcast sites for a half day of encouragement, laughter, and challenge. This year's speakers include Ted Cunningham, Derwin Gray, Jordan Montgomery, Brian Luritz, and more. Tickets are only $40 and they will sell out, so head on over to resgen.org to get you and your friends registered as soon as you can. And while there, be sure to check out info about our couples event, Date Night Comedy, which takes place at the end of February, and maybe grab your tickets for that as well. All right, my guest today is a friend of mine who I met about a year and a half ago at a retreat for pastors and speakers put on by the master of event curation, Brad Lomenick. Since that time, Joshua and I have shared many great conversations and also ministered alongside each other at this past fall's RESGEN Men's Lunch here in Sioux Falls. Joshua Broome is a husband, he's a father, pastor, and an author who has a radical story of redemption that God is using in a mighty way. After working in the darkness of the pornography industry for 6 years, Joshua found forgiveness, wholeness, and lasting freedom in Christ. And in 2019, Joshua graduated with a Bible degree from Liberty University. And now he devotes his life to helping men understand the love that Jesus has for them, experience healing from sexual brokenness, and discover their purpose. On today's show, Joshua shares the powerful story of how God used a bank teller to show him that his life was worth living, and how a short, grace-filled conversation with who would eventually become his wife paved the way for Jesus to change his life forever. We also talk about the prevalence of pornography in our culture, how we can better protect our kids and ourselves from falling prey to the porn pandemic, and how men can experience freedom that many have thought was never possible for them. I'm so grateful that you're tuning in for this episode. So here's my conversation with Joshua Broome. Joshua, brother, man, it is so good to have you here.
Hey, man, glad to be here in the beautiful state of South Dakota.
Yeah, and I love. So this is just to kind of let listeners know, you and I have been spending about the last 36 hours together. So we're coming in just with all sorts of conversations that we've already had. They're rolling around in our head, and we're saying, which ones are we going to bring to this episode of the pod? But I'm so grateful that we could bring you to South Dakota, your very first time being in our great state. So so thanks so much for being willing to come. And I just want to start really just by giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself to a lot of the RESGEN family that may not know you.
Yeah.
We did a lunch together yesterday, which was in the middle of October. Great gathering of men where we chatted just about obviously pornography, the prevalence of it, which we're going to get into that a little bit, and just encouraging us to be men who live in the light and live in the freedom that Jesus Christ offers each one of us.
Yeah.
And your story is one of experiencing that freedom after living a long life without it.
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you just to kind of introduce ourselves to you, and then we'll just roll.
Yeah. So just a little bit of my story.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah. I'd love that. Who you are, and listen.
Yeah.
You do you, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah. So Joshua Broome, I live in Dallas, Texas. My wife Hope. We've been married for almost 9 years. We got 4 boys. So 6, 4, 3, and 9 months old. So busy time in life. I predominantly do itinerant speaking. So speak at conferences, events. Speak some in the conservative space, podcast, all that good stuff. Yeah. And my story that I often share is that I grew up in a small town, fatherless, and that fatherlessness left a gap in my life, and I tried to mitigate that own gap, my own gap, like many of us do, where I'm believing that, well, if I become enough, I will feel as if I'm enough, and what I wanted to hear was, son, I'm proud of you. And I thought, well, if I could consume or achieve the counterfeit version of that, then maybe that would, quiet the restlessness in my soul. And that led me to an array of things where, becoming a good student, actor, athlete, all this stuff. And that led me to, at the age of 22, I'm in Hollywood. I've been there for a while, modeling, acting, get invited into a situation where I'm asked to do pornography on film. And I said yes. And that yes turned into a 6-year career where I did make millions of dollars. I had a ton of success, but it didn't give me what I thought it would, even though it was a compromised version of the dream that I had for myself. I thought maybe I could find myself or numb the pain that I had through making enough money, accomplishing enough people seeing me in a certain light, and that led to my demise.
Yeah. Well, and I want to get into that, but it was interesting because you just used a word there that as you and I were talking and having dinner last night, that you spoke that word as well, and that word was compromise.
Yeah.
And it was one compromise that you made that really made all the difference. And it was something that you didn't move to California with that on your mind.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because the way in which my story is often framed is that either that I was this, this horny teenager that, was very promiscuous, and I moved to Hollywood to do porn, and then I radically was saved and became a pastor the next day.
Yeah.
Which is like, there's some huge gaps in the story. But no, like I never sought out to do that. It was because I was exposed to pornography when I was, relatively young, and I didn't have an example of what a healthy dynamic of a relationship looked like. So, Romans 2:4 talks about you're either being conformed by the world or being transformed by the renewing of your mind. The world most certainly gave me an education as I thought what, intimacy, love, sex, and maybe if I replicated what I saw, I'd feel what I didn't.
That's such a powerful statement just right there of replicating what we see, but it doesn't really help us feel what we deeply want.
Yeah, I mean that's social media in a nutshell.
Oh, totally is, and it's the world. It's the pursuit of the world. And as I was reading, even in just my time with the Lord this morning, and there's a war that's on our heart. That I mean, we go to battle every single day, and it's for our heart. And are we going to allow the desires of our heart to be pleased by the love of the Lord and our pursuit of His purposes for our life, which and I know that's where even just part of your story and where you are finding purpose, or you found purpose when you found Christ. Yeah. And as men, we all want to live a life of purpose. Yeah. We all want to live up to our potential and steward the gifts and talents we've been given to the fullest. And so often we're tempted to do that in the pursuit of what the world offers, thinking that will fill that hole.
Yeah, I mean that's you just summed up, all of my, teens in my 20s where the shout out, Tropic Thunder is like I was the dude playing a dude disguised as the other dude that didn't know what dude he was. You know, like that's who I was, because I didn't know who I was, and I thought, well, if I put the mask on, whoever I think you want me to be, then you would like me, then you would affirm me, then I would feel what I wanted to feel. But really, I'm pretending to be someone I'm not, and I'm essentially manipulating your emotion. So what I'm getting is counterfeit, and what I'm showing to you is fake. So what equates from that? Emptiness. Like you get a momentary dose of dopamine in the interaction, but it doesn't lead to fruit. It doesn't lead to anything worth anything, because you end up again laying with your head on the pillow, wrestling with, what am I supposed to do? Who am I? How do I get what I don't have?
Yeah. So at the end of, so you've been in the industry for 6 years.
Yeah.
And you come to a point at the end of those 6 years where you're like, okay, I've checked the boxes. Like I've done these things that I thought that would fulfill me. That would, I made X number of dollars.
Yeah.
I've experienced the celebrity life. I've won some awards. I've done the thing. Yeah. But 6 years from your very first one, you are laying your head on the pillow, and you're like, this isn't it. Like this is not doing what I thought it would do or what I wanted it to do. Yeah. And then something remarkable happens. Yeah. And I don't want to steal the thunder of it, but you make another film,
Yeah.
and in that industry, you get paid like the minute it's not like you got to wait a 2-week period to get get paid. You walk out with the paycheck right there,
Yeah.
and you're going to take that to the bank, which was different from what you normally did with checks, correct?
Yeah. And I want to just take a brief moment to paint a picture of the depravity that I was in. Number one, I was dating someone that was in the industry, because like when you're in that industry, when you're having sex for a living, I'm doing 20 plus scenes a month, the probability of me having any friends or relationships outside of that industry, it's like no one's going to get it or truly accept you, or you're not going to allow them to accept you. So you end up in relationships with other people in the industry. And then I remember so clearly, I'm sitting at a table at dinner at Mastro's in Beverly Hills, and I'm on a date with a girl I'm dating, and there's another couple that's in the industry, and I had sex with his girlfriend last week, and he had sex with my girlfriend yesterday. And we're sitting there, this is an arbitrary situation, and we are suppressing reality to the extent where we're saying this is just work, and we're even saying that we're in a monogamous relationship.
Wow.
And when you suppress reality, what happens is chaos in your soul and destruction in your life. It's inevitable. So this is an ongoing thing. I had multiple relationships while I was in the industry, and it's a fictitious representation of reality where it's like you're going by a fake name and you're having fake interactions with people, and you're having really fake sex with others because there's a director telling you what to do. And like, yes, there's a start and a finish and an orgasm, but it's all directed and manipulated that is so different than what is natural, or what we call intimacy, regardless of your theological stance. So I say all that to say, at this point in my life, I've had it. And I even needed someone to give me permission to end my life. And I'm coming back from Atlanta. I'm on a flight from Atlanta to LAX. I'm on the flight. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to make a very clear plan to take my life. And when I get back, I'm like, okay, well, how do I get permission to do this? And the way that I was going to get permission was in that industry to your point, on the memo of the check, the director or the producer or whoever's writing the check would generally either write the title or something antagonistic, because the industry in itself is built on force, fraud, and coercion. So if I can minimize how you feel about yourself, you're going to be more likely to do the thing that you would say maybe today that you won't do, but maybe you'll do it tomorrow. So that was where I was in my life. And then I'm in the bank and I'm like, okay, I got this check. On the memo, it clearly articulated that this was me being compensated for doing sex. And I go in and I slide the check across the counter. And at this point in my life, I'm, a year removed from friends, fraternity brothers, mom. I believe that I disqualified myself from being a friend or a son to anyone that I cared about. So I'd remove myself from them, believing, saying that I'm doing them a favor, but really believing that I can't change. And I walk into the bank and I slide the check across the counter, and I'm waiting for, a nod of the head or, something under her breath just to reaffirm how I saw myself. And she said nothing. And then slides the receipt across the table, and I'm freaking out, I'm shaking, I'm pale, I'm like, what am I going to do? And then she hands me the check, and there's like this like weird disappointed. I'm contemplating like, now what?
Yeah.
And in that moment, she comes around the counter and she looks at me and she says, Joshua, are you okay? Like, Joshua, can I get you some help? Clearly, I was not okay.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment, she was prompted by the Spirit. And, I wasn't okay. And I felt, so unseen, and her seeing me and saying my name actually, unlocked and almost broke this plausible reality that I'd created based on shame. And I felt everything that I had numbed myself to. And the main thing was my mom reaching out to me. And there's people dying in my life left and right. Every roommate I've ever had, with the exception of one person, dead. There's people dying of AIDS. There's people getting murdered. There's people, falling off of buildings at parties, dying. So the wondering of a mother, is my son okay? It's not, man, I haven't heard from them in a week. I hope they're not getting in trouble. Like literally people in my life are dying left and right. So I was robbing my mom of that, and I felt the weight of that.
Yeah.
So I run home and I call her, and she's a good Southern mama, so she lit me up.
Yeah.
When I called her.
You had me worried for this long.
Yeah. And then once that subsided, she went, she said everything that I didn't think she would.
Yeah.
She said, "You'll always be my son. I love you. And I want you to know the same thing I've been telling you since you've been doing that. You are worth so much more than the way you're living. And I really wish you would just come home." So,
dude, those words. I mean, number one, when you hear that from a parent, who you felt that you've just wronged, and that you obviously did not feel that you were going to ever hear those words. But those words in that moment have to have just been so powerful to you. But I want to go back to just even the power of the bank teller saying your name, and share why just hearing your name was so powerful.
Yeah, I think to an extent, that part of me, I believed, had no value and was dead. So it's almost like, she spoke resurrection.
Yeah.
In that, everyone in my life was calling me by the stage name, because the only interactions I had was at the studio with, I had a driver, and then I had the same barber, and I went to the same gym, and I did takeout for the most part. It's like, a lot of people ask, like, well, were you partying or doing drugs and all this stuff? And it's like, I wasn't anywhere I wasn't being paid to. Like, if I was at a party, I was being paid to be in VIP. If I was at a signing, I was being paid to be there. Outside of that, I slowly became more and more of a recluse, because you are exposed to an extent that I could not even fully articulate to allow you to understand, where, there's a director telling you to have sex. There's, a boom mic over your head. There's a light, underneath you, and there's people just standing around, like, watching you like you're at a zoo. And it's so, like, it's so exposing that you lose touch with, like, reality to an extent, where it's like I could have sex in front of 10,000 people without blinking, but if you look me in the eye and shake my hand, I'd cry. Because that was real,
Wow. So you decide at that moment, like, after hearing the words of your mom, it's I'm leaving.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn my back on, I'm going to let this go so that I can just go home.
Yeah.
Which, to give up the, and I know that obviously the depths of relationships and friendships and all that was there, but it's still a big step to say, I'm going to leave this, what I've known for 6 years, to go home where I don't know if it's going to look like home anymore.
Right. And also I think it's important to, like, some people are like, oh, you must have gotten, like you must have not been, like, working anymore, or you got old or something like that. It's like, I was 30 years old, about to turn 30, and I just won Performer of the Year, and I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, a year. So I left, like, literally at the pinnacle of my career. So what I walked away from was everything that I thought I had value in, which that was that's why I stayed there, because I didn't believe I could do anything else. Like, this was my only worth, but also this was my only, like, contribution in a way where I'm there's any kind of, like,
it's funding your life.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. And I think it's like some people, like, that, it makes people uncomfortable when I share that parts of my story, but, like, that's the beauty of God's grace. Where, like, you think about Romans 2:4, it's His love, His kindness, His patience that leads us into repentance. And I think, in a way, sometimes God will let us experience everything that we think is going to satisfy our soul to understand it won't.
Yeah.
So I leave that, and I've got literally nothing in my repertoire, with the exception of a certification to coach CrossFit. I've done that a little bit, and it was like, CrossFit was kind of new to the scene. I started doing it in, like, 2009. I really came on the scene like 2006, 2007, like, in SoCal. And you're getting certified in it, it wasn't necessarily so that you could teach it or coach it or own a gym, but that certification equipped you and allowed you to do all those things. But most people would just get it so that you could have the experience, and almost it was like a badge of honor, where it's like if you got the financial means and the love for it, you would go and get a level 1 certification so that, you know, you've gone through the ringer and you get a little bit better because you get like really great coaching from, you know, when you get the credentials, you have to take part in the classes and stuff. But that's all I had.
Yeah.
So I left with, I'm like, okay, I have no idea what I'm going to do, and maybe I can do that.
You just knew you needed to do something different to save your life. And get
literally.
out there.
I left because I was running for my life. It's like I wasn't like running.
It wasn't running towards God at that moment.
No,
it was just running from death.
Yeah, and it's so ironic. It's like, so when because I was a big it's like I loved rap. And then I was a huge fan of Justin Timberlake, and I got a Celtic cross tattooed on my shoulder when I was 17. And the first thing I did was I covered up that cross, which, you know, that in itself is a whole other conversation. But I covered that up, and, you know, I literally did everything that I could to hide from who I was, where like covered up my tattoos, deleted my social media, shaved my head. But we lived in a world where like DVD was still king, and like some of the award shows were like on Showtime, and I thought I was gonna leave LA and be able to hide, and I get a job. I literally applied to like every gym, every CrossFit gym in like 100-mile proximity where my mom lived, and I got a few offers, and I'm like, okay, well, these, you know, because coaching CrossFit full time like wasn't like, that wasn't something that was happening outside of if you owned a gym. Okay. You know, it was a very like entrepreneurial, like I'm going to own a gym and I'm going to coach most of the classes, and then maybe I'll make enough money to stay afloat. But like just hiring someone as a coach and coaching enough classes to pay for your living, pretty like, you know, outside the norm. But I found a gym that would like, okay, here's enough classes where like it would make sense. And it was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I go there, and I'm working at that gym. And then the week that I was there, I was at Whole Foods, and I'm walking past just a section in the store, and someone stops me. It's like, dude, aren't you that guy? But he says that, you know, my stage name. And I was just like, dang.
Yeah.
Like day one. And it's like, man, I can't escape this. Yeah. But I continue to try. And it's like, I got a great mentor. Yeah, I got, you know, this guy, everybody calls him Doc, but his name's Jason Davidson. So he was the strength and conditioning coach for the Carolina Hurricanes, and he oversaw the strength conditioning happening at Fort Bragg, and now he runs the Thor program there. But he was willing to mentor me, and he mentored me and pointed me to places to get, you know, credentials and certifications, and poured into me, and you know, gave me opportunities. And I mean, just who I am personality wise, it's like, well, whatever I'm doing, 110%. I'm going to do the work. I don't want to be mediocre. I want to be great at what I'm doing. And I poured myself into that, and I became successful. But at the same time, I was like trying to put enough good dirt on my bad dirt, so I didn't look dirty. Not that I felt dirty, because I couldn't change the way I felt. But what I thought was, and what most people try to do, is when you try to stack enough good things over, you know, the bad things that you've done or the bad aspects of your life, what you're trying to do is you're trying to stack the scale in your favor so that you can manage the perception other people have of you, because you can't fix the perception you have of you.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. And as I hear that story, Joshua, and just it reminds me of how God is always active and utilizing people on our journey that sometimes we don't realize at the moment, right? But as we look back, you say, man, God was being so faithful and providing people in my life that although we wouldn't necessarily say, oh man, they led me to Jesus,
right?
But they were sharing words that we needed to hear at that moment that would eventually lead us to hearing the voice of God in different ways. So you mentioned that already when thinking about the bank teller, right? I mean, that God used her to say a certain statement to you that you need to hear at that moment. Joshua, starting with your name.
Yeah.
are you okay?
And it's pretty cool that Joshua means Yahweh is salvation. Also.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No question. And then you got this guy that says, and as a guy who grew up without a dad in the home, I mean, we have very similar stories in just different ways. I mean, but it's having other men in our life see value in us, and even just saying like, hey, you're worth my time, and I see something in you that you may not see in yourself, and so let me help you get to where you want to go. Yeah. And that's this guy, Doc, that you mentioned, was that voice that you needed to hear at that moment, even just to give you courage and an idea that you could do something else outside of this industry that you were in. Yeah.
I mean, it makes me think back when I was playing basketball in high school, and Coach Blakeney, he was instrumental in my life, where he was literally the only man I ever had in my life at any point in my childhood that reinforced positive things in my life. And I just remember so clearly that it meant so much to me that he would choose to put the ball in my hand at the end of the game. And for me, it's so weird to think about, but I didn't even care if I made the shot. I was just glad that he chose me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels good to be chosen.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
But I would say it feels better to be chosen than it does to make the shot. Mm-hmm. If you've felt most of your life that you've been overlooked or not chosen by people who you need to choose you or want to choose you.
Yeah. As we're talking, I just think about how everybody out there that's just listening right now or watching, what a powerful thing it would be for each person to take their phone, shoot a text, take a note card, grab a pen, write a note, put it in an envelope, put this thing called a stamp on it, and mail it out. That's just a thank you for the roles that different people have played in their life at key moments. That maybe we wouldn't necessarily think about until even this moment of saying, who else was really important? My second grade teacher, Mrs. Cadell, who told me back in the day that, you're an excellent student. Yeah. Or whatever, right? And I mean, that's a true story of just Mrs. Cadell, who was just very influential as a second grader, who just saw potential in this kid. I think about other people that I've shared even on this pod of, Steve and Alan and Chris and these other guys that saw potential in a skinny 14-year-old kid that had an extremely low self-esteem, that wore masks, basically just yearning for affirmation. Yeah. But they saw the potential that I didn't see. So, man, that is so. You're in this this CrossFit space. Yeah. And I want to get now into just the way that God used a gal in your life to help you understand or just initiate a thinking that there may be something more for your life, and that there's a God who loves you so deeply.
Yeah. Because like the reality was, like, even though I wasn't in that industry, I was still living a very, unhealthy, unwholesome lifestyle. And this girl walks in the gym. She's by far the best athlete. She's always wearing these like Iowa Hawkeye like cheerleading stuff. So obviously she's an alumni. In CrossFit, it's like if you can do gymnastic stuff, she's walking on her hands, she's doing handstand push-ups, easy muscle ups, like all the stuff. I'm just like, and she's just super gorgeous. Yeah. And I asked her on a date, and she's like, I'm good. No thanks. I'm like, wow. But also it's like,
hear me out.
But it was weird. It was almost like the instant like rejection, almost like it amplified the intrigue in a way. And then I was like, maybe I just need to ask a different question. And then I was like, went from dinner to a movie. And she was like, well, we can go on a run. She's like, I run before church every Sunday. Do you want to meet me for a run? I've run at this park. And I was like, yes. Well, whatever I can get. I'll take whatever I get. And I meet her at this park, and I get there early, and I'm waiting on her to get there. And I'm just like thinking, what am I going to say? All this stuff. And then I just get like this like weird conviction. And I'm like, man, she doesn't like hang out at the gym, because like a CrossFit place is like pretty communal. It's, like people hang out together. They know like the in and outs of their lives, because that's a large part of the draw. And but she would, like, when she was there, but like she was like, as soon as class was over, she was out of there. She just was, she was pretty introverted, but just not about like hanging out a ton. So I'm like, man, I bet she has no idea about my story. She has no idea about me. And this is 2 years removed from the industry. And as soon as she gets there, I'm just like, I gotta tell you everything about me, because it's almost like I wasn't doing it for her, I was doing it for me. And that, like, because if you knew me, you're gonna want no part of me. So I'm trying to protect myself from getting hurt before it happens. And I was like, hey, I'm this kid that his daddy didn't want, and I've done all this bad stuff. And a lot of the bad stuff that I've done that I have a lot of shame about is one click away for the world to see on the internet. This is who I am. And she was pretty taken back by that, obviously. Sure. And pretty quickly said, well, like, some clarifying questions, like, are you doing this now? Like, are you, like, what's going on? And I was like, no, like, this was who I was and what I was doing 2 years ago, but this is who I am. We're still in the residue of this is who I am. Yeah. And she obviously, like, wheels are turning, contemplating, not saying much, and we're not running. We're just, walking at a pretty slow pace. And then she stops and she looks at me, and, she's elementary teacher, she's teacher. So, like, almost like mom look, teacher look. And she looks at me with some firmness and says, I want you to know that you're not defined by the worst thing you've ever done. And you're not defined by the greatest thing you'll ever do either. I don't want to minimize the pain that you felt or the stuff that you went through. And I'm sure those things impact the way that you feel about yourself, but that's not who you are, because there's one author of you and it's not you. Do you know who God is? And I was like, because what I'm hearing is everything I think about myself is not true, is what she's saying to me. Because I believe those things are the most true, right, about me. And as I'm wrestling with that, she asked me, "Oh, do you know God?" And I was like, "Sure." At that time, I probably would have agreed to, like, cosmological argument makes sense. Time, space, and matter came into existence simultaneously. There had to be an outside, intelligent being that was catalytic for that. Like, that made sense. So yeah, sure, God created everything, created me. Yeah. And she was like, "Well, I've been following Jesus since I was in 7th grade, and I'm not perfect by any means, but my relationship with him is the foundation from how I live my life. So what kind of food do you like?" And I was like, "What? What are you talking about? Like, you don't want to run?"
Yeah.
And she didn't. She wanted to ask me questions. She wanted to know about my family. Family was something that was important to her, and I shared. And it was like, I feel like is she an alien or something? As she's describing her family to me, I'm like, do you live in a Hallmark movie? Like, what is this? And she just shares with me with, like, so much gentleness, like a lot of truth, but a lot of grace, like, happening at the same time. That makes me like Colossians 4:6. Let your speech be gracious and seasoned with salt, so you might know how you ought to answer each person. In the individual answer and the uniqueness of her answer, I was spawned into curiosity, and I'm like, man, I feel curious about her, but also, like, is it possible what she's saying is true?
Yeah.
And then we text for about a week, and then she invited me to church the following Sunday, and I went and heard this sermon about 2 Samuel chapter 9, about how Mephibosheth, when he was offered grace, when he didn't expect it, he didn't know how to accept it. And that was, I was like, yeah, me too.
Yeah,
like,
what a powerful message to hear on that Sunday.
Yeah, where it's like, man, I'm with you, where it's like, I understand the gospel. And at this point, it's like, you made a great argument that Jesus is God and he did die. And there's significant evidence that he was a real person that really walked the earth, that really died and rose again. And if that's true, then that means something. But does it mean what you're saying for me? Because don't you know who I am?
Yeah.
And then I heard Hebrews 12:2, and something about the joy set before him as he endured the cross, scorning our shame. And it's like, in retrospect, it's powerful that he's seated at the right hand of God, because he's sitting, because he's done, But just something about that joy, it caused me to wrestle with something in a way where, the Holy Spirit did what I could never do, and disarmed me and broke into the crevices of my heart. And I understood that it was love for me by him as he went to the cross. He had joy in his heart because he was doing that so that I could be reunited, like to himself forever. Not because I deserved it, because he loved me that much.
Right. Even you. And that's the thing. Like, it awakened your spirit to saying, like, that's even possible for me.
Yeah.
And I think there's something within each one of us that makes us wonder, but is that, like you said, is that true for me? Like, is that even possible for a guy like me who did this? And that's where I think, like, when you look at Paul, right, who at the time was Saul when he met Christ.
Yeah.
And then it's so powerful in 1 Timothy when he says, listen, I just want you to know that it's possible for anyone because I'm like the chief of sinners, man. And in the Message translation, or with Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of scripture in 1 Timothy, it says, like, and now look at me, he puts me on display for all to see.
Yeah.
A model of his grace and his mercy and his love, a visible sign of all of that.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, why is Moses' murder, David's adultery, and then, his secondhand murder of Uriah, Peter's denial, like, why are all these failures, like Elijah's, like, suicidal tendencies, like, why are all these things in the Bible? Well, God is in the business of saving perfect people and drawing them to himself, and then restoring and repurposing everything that was for his glory.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just the beauty of the gospel.
Yeah.
It is because of what he has done. It allows us to not only come into a relationship with him, but it transforms every nook and cranny of us. And the more we're willing to surrender ourselves to him, he'll take the mess of our brokenness and pain and hurt and even things that we're most shamed of, and he will shape them and use them to draw people to himself.
Yeah. And that's so good. And I think that I mean, even just to stop right now, and because I'm sure there's some listeners and some people that they feel that they're too far gone.
Yeah.
They feel that they're too far away. And I mean, your story, Paul's story, it shows that there's absolutely no one that is too far gone to come into an understanding of how much Jesus loves them.
Yeah.
And the freedom that he wants to bring in their life and the purpose that he can give them in their life.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's the beautiful part. It's like,
I know.
Yes, 2 Corinthians, like everyone like loves 2 Corinthians 5:17. But if you keep reading, it's like not only your new creation, now you're given a new purpose. Like now you are a messenger of this word of reconciliation.
Yep.
You are a carrier of the antidote for death.
Yes.
And your very existence is to give that to hurting people.
And that the second part of that I think is so crucial for us to understand, because the reality is that sometimes we are even tempted to look at other people and say, oh, they're too far gone. Yeah. Like there's no way. Like it's one thing to look at ourselves in that way.
Yeah.
But then now we are to be people that look at others and say, man, there is no one that is too far gone.
Yeah.
And what if?
Yeah.
Like you asked the question, what if? Well, what if that was true for me?
Right.
But what if now God wants to use you to help that person understand?
Yeah.
And what a different mindset that is. And that sends every single one of us, if we will just internalize that and allow that to be our mindset, that sends every single one of us out every day on mission.
Yeah. And I mean, it does two things where it's like, it keeps us humble, number one. But also it's like, man, don't take for granted anything that God wants to use in your tool belt that you might not want to use. Because like you like as you put your life, if you take your life and you scatter it across the table, and there's some things that you learned and you did as you were pursuing things that were not godly, but there's skills that you developed, and there's, systems that you can utilize that, surrendered into God's hands, you can utilize those skills and those systems to impact people for God's glory.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's so many times where I see people that were great at one thing, but like in that greatness, there's scar tissue. And I don't want to do anything that makes me feel the way that I used to feel. And if there's any kind of association with that, like for me, it was stepping on stage. where I was like, I wanted no part of a platform. I wanted to be a pastor of a church with like 14 people, maybe 15, like tops. It's like I wanted.
You just had a baby, you're out.
Yeah.
Too late.
Yeah, I'm like, I wanted no part of like a lot of people looking at me. I just wanted to teach the Bible to people, and then love on them, and that's what I wanted to do. But God had a different plan. Like in throughout that plan over the last 10 years, it's been very uncomfortable because there's things that I have done and learned and experienced and skills that I've developed that were in a place of significant depravity. But the reality that is God knitted me together in my mother's womb. Like He numbered the hairs on my head. Ephesians 2:10. Like He preordained and predestined things in me so that I should walk in them. So that there were things along my journey that He was developing in me. And sure, I was misusing those gifts and talents, but that doesn't change the fact that I have those gifts and talents because He gave me those things to do something for His glory. And I can be wounded in this place where I don't want to use those gifts and talents because it reminds me of who I used to be, but I have to remember that person is dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and so you meet Christ, and then obviously you begin to be discipled. Yeah. And you eventually end up at Liberty, where you go through just Bible classes, and you graduate with a Bible degree. And so
cool that I just did convocation there. Yeah. It's like, man, that was just like such a cool like 360 moment.
Yeah. And now God has given you the opportunity to be that person in a variety of different ways, different stages. Yes, obviously sharing the gospel, but also now God is putting you in places where you can go in and you can work on legislation.
Yeah.
And you can work on trying to put things in place to protect kids and try to help people that are, getting sucked into the industry or whatever. So I want to talk, and praise God for this whole conversation. Praise God for the work He's done in your life and that He continues to do, right? I mean, and that's the reality is that God did a tremendous work in your life. As He's done in so many of our lives and the listeners, but God's not done yet.
Right.
I mean, He's continuing to do work in you, and He's continuing to do work in all of us. And we need to continue to lean into that work that He's doing in us. And then as we do that, He's doing work through us.
Yeah.
And so you are, as I just said, very busy sharing that the gospel, but then also just the proliferation that pornography is having in our culture, in our world, and in our homes. And so I want to talk briefly just about some of the, because I think that even as we were talking yesterday at the lunch that we did together, along with our good friend Jason Van Ruler, I don't think people really understand just the prevalence of pornography.
Yeah.
And so share some of that stuff, because I think that was really eye-opening for, I know, a lot of people in the room, because they're like, I had no clue that this percentage of web traffic is pornography.
Yeah. So between 32 to 35% on a daily basis, 32 to 35% of all the data transferred on the internet on a daily basis is pornography. And then regarding revenue generated, more money than NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NFL all combined by several $billion. So just like thinking about that, where it's like, man, if that many people are watching and how's it generating that, that much revenue, like those things go together. Because most people say, well, porn is free. How's it making money? Well, you don't understand marketing. Where there are eyes there are marketing dollars. So you can run ads on places that, where people are. And to point to that example, right now, we're in the middle of a political season, and in 7 states, there are political ads being ran on the most visited porn site in the world. Why? Because there's 30 million eyes per day on those sites. And then like just looking at the practicality of how it's impacting the world, well, 90% of pornography contains violence. And you look at 51% of divorces that happen in America, pornography is a primary contributing factor. And then with kids, average age of exposure, some people will say 11. It's trending towards 8, where I've seen a lot of data. And then on top of that, so 84% of kids who see porn for the first time, 15 and under, it's secondhand exposure, meaning that either someone showed it to them or they were not looking for it and they found it. AKA it's looking for your kids.
Yeah.
It's looking for you and your kids.
Yeah.
Because, we live in an age that's very different because of streaming, because of the way that media is consumed now, because of the accessibility of our phones. You don't have to go to a DVD store. You don't have to buy a magazine. You can open TikTok. You can open Twitter. Pornography is widely and aggressively solicited on Twitter. So if you don't have, your smartphones locked down, you don't have safety settings on certain things, and even if you do, Twitter houses the ability to search the internet like on a separate browser. So even if you have, theoretically covenant eyes on your phone, you could use Twitter as a browser to search for pornography, and that wouldn't be discoverable if you had it locked down.
Yeah.
And it's just like so many things like that. It's like, man, it's negatively contributing to culture. We see less people are getting married. People are getting married later in life. They're having less kids. Abortion is something that's being talked about as like first and foremost, like one of the most primary issues in today's election. And it's like, well, why does that happen? Well, you look at the Bible start to finish. Every time there's an upheaval and an uprising in sexual morality, what goes hand in hand with it? Child sacrifice. So it's like we see the byproduct of all that. We're living in a post-Christian fatherless nation, and if you look at fatherlessness, it's the best predictor of all the major problems that we see in our country. So how is it detrimental?
Yeah,
incredibly. So my hope is that through personal testimony and empirical data from how it impacts the brain to how it impacts culture to how it impacts and is very dangerous for children. My hope is that people will see it for what it is. And, I would say it wouldn't be too extreme to declare it a public health crisis, because that's how detrimental it is to society.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even just you think about it's wreaking havoc on marriages.
Yeah.
But it's wreaking havoc because this is not people just outside the church. This is not just stats that are happening outside the church.
No, it's like you look at Fight the New Drug, like all this data is like, first off, like Fight the New Drug like leads with we're non-legislative, we're non-religious. So all this data, it's coming from a scientific approach where it is detrimental to your brain, and because it's detrimental to your prefrontal cortex, it impacts your will and it impacts your decision making. So what does that mean? Well, right now there are kids raping their sibling because incestual porn is one of the most popular niches in the world, and that's happening in the 60th percentile in the United States and around 70% in Australia. So like that's just not like an objective thing that, I think, man, that's bad, you shouldn't do that. It's having a real impact on the world because people are seeing things and they're believing lies and they're living out those things. They're developing an appetite for something they, were never developed to have taste buds for. And you become so overwhelmed with something you see, you feel like you need to have, a deeper dose in real life, and you end up doing something you would say I would never do.
Yeah, which is why I think, going back to what we talked about just moments ago, in the power of one compromise.
Yeah.
One compromise led you down this road that you intended never to go down.
I lost 10 years of my life because of one decision.
Because of one decision. And so, we always, I think, can approach different situations, or we can often approach situations and say, well, one click's not going to make a difference. Right? It's never going to happen to me. Recently I had a podcast with Tom Bassan, a pastor in Colorado, and he talked about two statements that were just so powerful that really kind of help us keep on the rails. They're warning statements that we say to ourselves.
Yeah.
And one is, it'll never happen to me.
Yeah.
And then I deserve this.
Sure.
Right? And so I think about the power of one decision, the power of the clip, and where it could lead. No one intends to get there.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask so as you're speaking, as you're talking in small gatherings, just one-on-one settings with guys specifically, since that's our main audience here, like how can we better protect?
Yeah.
Let's start with ourselves.
Yeah.
Actually, let's just, you can start however you want, but ourselves, but then also our kids, our grandkids, because I think that for some, because they're not necessarily fully aware of everything that's happening in culture, in our society and all that, like all those stats you just said.
Yeah.
It can be overwhelming.
Sure.
Because it's like, well, man, how do I protect my babies? How do I protect my grandkids?
Yeah.
Like, think about you. Like, you've got 4 young children.
Yeah.
And so, you have a unique perspective, obviously, and a unique knowledge, but how do we protect our kids and how do we protect ourselves so that we don't fall into compromise?
Yeah. So I'll start with ourselves because as we know, it's like leadership is something I'm passionate about, and you can't lead anyone anywhere that you're not willing to where you're not willing to go, or where you're not willing to go first. So I would say I need to take inventory of my life and ask, like, where are there small compromises being made? Yeah. Because a compromise only leads to deeper compromise, because I can't just compromise in one area of my life and believe the lie that it's not going to bleed over into every area of my life. So I need to take inventory of my life. And the only way that I can truly do that is if I have someone that truly knows me, that knows me well enough to ask me the tough questions, to give me encouragement when I need it, but also to pick and prod. Proverbs 27:6 talks about the wounds of the wounds of a friend. Sometimes you need someone that loves you enough to say something that stings in that moment, so that it calls you out of a place that maybe you were heading that you didn't think was that big of a deal, or maybe you were blind to how you're living. Because I like to paint the picture of, man, if you're going from New York to Los Angeles and you're 5 degrees off, you're going to end up in Canada. You're going to end up in a place that you never wanted to go and never planned to be. And as it's been said many times before, sin will cost you more than you're willing to pay. You know.
That's why I think that one of the statements that my mentor taught me many, many years ago was having those conversations and asking this question. Or if you're like, let's say that I'm in a conversation with you, and I say, okay, Joshua, what do you need to tell me that you don't want to tell me?
Sure.
Right. And that's such a powerful question, because it causes you to reflect and say, okay, this part of my life that I want to keep hidden, but that it's keeping me hidden just as a person. It's keeping a wedge between me and the Lord, me being able to fully connect to other people. And it's causing destruction.
Yeah. There's a guy, Andrew, that's been discipling me for 9 years. And every Friday we have a conversation that sometimes lasts 10 minutes, sometimes it lasts an hour, but we talk about, how am I feeding my flesh? How am I feeding my spirit? And how am I feeding my family? And I need to be able to answer those 3 questions. And if I can't answer them, that's problematic for me, because that means I'm not living my life with self-awareness. Because if I'm not aware of what I'm doing, well, the way that sin works, I'm not gravitating towards righteousness. I'm drifting towards depravity. So
say those 3 questions.
Yeah. So how am I feeding my flesh? How am I feeding my spirit? And how am I feeding my family? I'm sorry, my marriage. Yeah. So flesh, spirit, marriage.
Yeah.
So how am I intentionally either making decisions that is contributing to health, or making decisions that are compromising myself and leading to me not being healthy. Because it's easy to look healthy. It's easy to say, hey, what have you been doing? Well, reading my Bible and doing this, and hit 315 on the bench and stuff like that. Like, that's great. What's your thought life like? When you were at the gym, did you see anything that was triggering for you, and did you think anything that you didn't want to think, and what did you do with those thoughts? Because for me, that's when I started getting real healthy. Because it's like, when you think about, okay, take every thought captive, make it obedient to Christ. Okay, so yes, but what does that mean practically? Well, making that obedient to Christ. Well, it's James 5:16. When it's like, I need to confess unto God, but also I need to confess to others, so that a righteous man can love me enough to pray for me, and I can be held accountable in a way that I'm not going to hold myself accountable.
Which is and you and I had a great conversation last night about the power of friendship, which is so difficult for men a lot of times to have, but friendship is so key in this, and true friendship. Not just relationships and okay, we have all these people out here, but
now we go to Buffalo Wild Wings every Thursday. And
we have the meaningful conversations where we care deeply about one another enough to say, hey, regardless, I'm walking with you.
And it's like, man, you're like, love you enough to say, hey, Tom, you're a little bit off today. And
for sure.
Like, what's going on? It's like, you could either nothing, or I can lean into it. Yeah. So I mean, it's so important. And I just want to like back up just a little bit, just like real quick, like about the kids thing. Like how can we lead our kids well in an over sexualized culture? There's a really great book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and Kristen Jensen wrote this. It's 10 years old, and it has a theme that is important and a message that everyone needs to hear. And that, hey, there are things that exist in the world that you ought not see. And if you see them, that does not make you bad. Right. And in the same way, like this book is, it's catered to 4 to 7 year olds, but it really is broader than that. We've read it to all our kids. Because essentially it's like, hey, if you're scared, what do? Come to dad. If you're hurt, what do? You come to dad. If you see something that you ought not see, don't let shame cause you to keep it secret. Don't like feel bad about yourself. You're not bad. Mm-hmm. You saw something that you ought not see. Now bring those feelings to me and let's process them out loud. Mm-hmm. Because when you live like that, what you do is you are building equity in their lives so that when something happens, and it will. Yeah. They will see something. Someone will show them something. You cannot protect yourself or your kids from seeing things that are pervasive in this world. Sexual immorality has been around since 2000 BC. It was on the caves and Mesopotamia, like it was like etched on caves. Yeah. So sexual immorality is always going to be in our culture. But how can I equip people to not react, but to respond? Because reactionary behavior is I'm going to allow a person or a situation to dictate my behavior. Responsive, reaction is going to be there's a foundation from which I've built that gives me the tools and the practicality to not react, but respond based upon something that's bigger than me. Mm-hmm. So it just allows me to say, hey, if you see this, if someone shows that to you, number one, it's not okay. Yeah. But also, let's talk about it.
Yeah, this is a safe place to come.
Because for parents, like if they come to you, and I mean, in the same way, like this would be the same like for a spouse or a parent. If your husband comes to you and say, hey, there's I've compromised, in my life. I've seen something I saw something on Instagram, and then I clicked on a few things and I ended up on this website, and I needed to get this off my chest to you. I processed this with a friend, and I've thought about it and I prayed about it. And I just want to bring this to you. I'm so sorry that I broke your trust and I did this. And I want to tell you because I love you and I want to have integrity in our relationship. How they respond to that matters a lot. Yeah. And not saying that there shouldn't be boundaries and, you shouldn't, not telling you how you should feel, but how you respond matters greatly because that person already is feeling shame, and you can either give them permission to step into the grace of God or amplify their shame. And that is even more so as a parent. Yeah. A kid brings something to you. It's like, oh, I did this. If you freak out, that will be the last time they ever tell you anything like that. And trust, it won't be the last time they see it. Yeah. So how you respond matters so much. Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope that I'm so glad that you mentioned a book, a resource that you can do. I mean, as single parents, for you to do on your own and be proactive in that as opposed to reactive. But then also if you're married, to be able to do that together, because I think that's also so important, is that there's a response together. It's not like, okay, well, go talk to your mother. Or whatever, right?
And there's so many like great resources out there. It's like Covenant Eyes is really great for adults, and then in the same way, Bark, BARK is like really great for kids. And what it allows is you see what they see, but they don't know that you saw it. So that because like you saying, hey, I know, I love the example that you share with your son, because you catered that conversation in a way that you were not accusatory. You invited him to confess. Yeah. So it's like, hey, have you seen anything on the internet that, was kind of off base? Yeah. Or have you searched for anything? Have you found anything? Has someone sent something to you that maybe, you didn't want to see, you shouldn't see? Because in the contrast of that was like, hey, I know that you've been looking at porn. Let's talk about it. Like, how's that conversation going to go? Right. Like, not well, not well. Yeah. So it invites, you invite someone into this safe place. So like that's just parenting well. So, I mean, I really appreciated that example that you gave yesterday.
Yeah, well, and the reality is that for us to create those safe places for our kids to be able, because you're right, what you're doing is you're laying this foundation of saying nothing is off limits for our family.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I didn't make any mistakes in how I
Right.
approach certain situations with our boys, but that was one that is just something that I was grateful to have. Even just I think it's also important, like. And what you're speaking of, just for those that maybe are going, what are they talking about? That I was always speaking at an event, and my accountability partner received an email saying that this is, hey, are you okay? Or saying that I'd searched for something on my home computer.
Yeah.
And so he texted me and just said, hey, are you okay? Like, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. But he's like, well, because this was a search that just happened. And I'm like, well, what time? And I was on stage at that time. I'm like, oh, I bet you maybe my son was on the computer doing homework. And he just followed some things. It found him. Yeah. I mean, he was a participant, but as I was talking to him and he felt this, Dad, I'm so sorry. And I just felt this overwhelming feeling, this is him talking, of just, I can't get the images out of my head. And the scary thing is I wanted to go back, which is what you're talking about, even just the way that it rewires our brain.
Yeah.
And I just remember him being 13 years old and just climbing in my lap. And I don't know if it was the first time that he saw it or whatever, but he just climbed in his lap and he just wept. And I wept with him. Yeah. And I said, I'm so sorry that is. But you know what? You can always come to me.
Yeah. And
that was something that was kind of laid as a foundation for our boys, and just saying there's nothing off limits in our family.
Yeah.
And we want you to be on, because honesty is everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's and a statement that you made yesterday at the end of our lunch was that, and maybe I'm stealing a little thunder as to how we were going to end our time here together, but we can always circle back. But, you're only as free as you're willing to be honest.
Yeah.
And we want to create that culture of freedom in our homes.
Yeah.
And we want to create that culture of freedom in our relationships with our spouses, with our kids, with friends.
Yeah.
And so I love that when the understanding of like, okay, we can try to protect our kids as much as we can.
Yeah.
We can build shelters around them, whatever.
Yeah.
And the reality is they're going to have to live in this world.
Yeah. So
how are we preparing them to live in this world?
Yeah. 100%.
And that's such that's a conversation we can't avoid having.
Yeah.
And as couples and as families. Yeah. And so I'm super appreciative of that counsel.
Yeah. And just thinking about that statement, like we're only as free as we're honest, regarding maybe someone struggling with an addiction to pornography, and you've found yourself in many circles where someone confesses, and then you feel the freedom to shake your head or say, me too. And I would just challenge that it is the depth of your confession that equates to a certain level of healing. And what I mean by that is there's a freedom that comes from someone that's saying, yeah, but I was looking at a site and, shouldn't have been doing it, but, here we are again. Mm. In contrast to, this is the site that I went to. This is what I put in the search bar. I masturbated. I felt terrible about it. Went to sleep for 2 hours, woke up again, did it again. And I want to throw my computer away and burn it. That's where I am. Because that person that's willing to say the things that seem unmentionable, there's a level of freedom that comes from saying something in the regard of what it is.
Yeah.
So I would just say, man, find someone that you trust that loves Jesus and tell them the stuff that you have not said out loud before. Because when you say it, there's, this burden that's going to be lifted off from you, but also you're inviting them into your life in a way where it's like, man, if I'm going to say this is problematic in my life, it's not that I'm just admitting that I did it. I'm saying that, man, I'm putting my flag into the ground, and I'm saying, I don't like what I did, but I want to fight to be different.
Mm-hmm. And having someone fight with you is so crucial. It's so crucial. And I think that's why we're so passionate and, with RESGEN and trying to get guys to have what we call bands of brothers, 3 to 4 men that are meeting together regularly, encouraging one another to love Jesus, love their wives and their kids, and to live in the light, in all aspects of their life. And I'll just never forget watching that series, Band of Brothers, back in the day, a miniseries, and hearing testimonies from from real soldiers, not the actors, but real soldiers. And one guy saying, when I'm in the trench, I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for my brothers.
Yeah.
And we've all had people in our life and brothers that we've seen fall.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I grow weary of that. And my heart breaks. And so it's just, how can we fight for one another so that the guys in our circles, they won't be a statistic.
Right.
And so I'm so glad that you talked about that, because that was going to be one of my final questions for you. Is just like, okay, we've had a great conversation here, and there may be guys that are saying, man, this freedom that you talk about, I desperately want it.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between confession and getting caught.
Yeah.
And the power of that confession is huge.
Yeah.
And so, maybe that's you today, and you need to find that brother.
Yeah.
And you need to find that brother, that person that you can come and that you can just talk with.
Yeah.
Some guys, I know there's probably some people, Joshua, that some guys may not have that brother.
Yeah.
They might not have that person. And so maybe for you, it starts with going and talking with a pastor.
Yeah.
And then I know sometimes, pastors don't know how to handle it, depending upon, just training, So is there any counsel that you would give to someone that like, I don't know who I'd go to?
Yeah.
Like, who do I go to?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's the beauty of being part of a church, because like a church is not a building, it's a people. And there's people within that church that love you, that care about discipleship. And part of discipleship is pointing people into relationship. So I would say that would be step one. Find a church in your area that teaches the Bible, that cares about community, and if there's a men's ministry, if you're a man and you're struggling with that, it's like, man, get plugged in there, because it's so easy for people to think, man, it's like, I don't want to burden anyone with my problems.
Yeah.
Man, there are guys that serve in men's ministries. They're like the most, like the best gift you could ever give them is the opportunity to pour their life into yours.
Yeah.
Like they're just like weighted with
and the
bated
best
breath.
you can give yourself.
Yeah.
That's a gift. That's a mutual gift.
Yeah. Well, that's reciprocity.
Yeah.
It's like, but yeah, man, like that's where it's at. It's like, man, I find someone somewhere to say the thing that I haven't said out loud.
Yeah.
Because there's so much freedom in that. And also I have to do my due diligence. I have to take inventory of my life. If I'm saying that, I want to live differently, well, if I do what I've always done, I'll get what I've always got, So it's like, I need to take inventory of my life. What am I consuming? Who am I listening to? What kind of relationships am I in? Like what, John 15:5, or John 15 in general. It's like there needs to be cutting and pruning if my life wants to be dedicated to remaining in the vine and my life bearing fruit. There needs to be cutting and pruning in my life. And sometimes that'll sting, and sometimes that'll hurt, badly. But if I'm committed to living a different life, there's things that need to be cut out. But also I need to have awareness.
Yeah.
I need to have awareness in that. And there's boundaries that I need to set. And those are going to be individualistic, where there's things that are not going to bother me that might bother you. Like maybe it's, alcohol in a bar or whatever it might be, certain holidays.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the gym that you go to. Maybe it's as simple as the gym that you go to has a co-ed sauna, and that's just not a good place for you to go. And like so many people, like for me, the most simplistic thing I did when I started following Jesus, I stopped bringing my phone or laptop into my bedroom or bathroom. Mm-hmm. And for me, I had to stop touching myself altogether. So I was like, new loofah every week for life, because like, man, if you're using a loofah for longer than a few weeks, man, that's super gross.
Yeah.
but anyway, but it's like, man, but just the practicality.
Boundaries.
Yeah, the practicality. Yes, like I'm and it's like something I said yesterday, and something I'm super passionate about, and still like exploring how to articulate this in a deeper, more expounded way. Where like discipline, a great definition is like, are you willing to keep the promises you make to yourself?
Yeah.
Because if you're saying that you want to change and then you do something that you don't want to do, introspectively, you have to ask, well, why? Like, what am I searching for? What am I trying to numb? What do I not want to deal with? Because more often than not, the alcohol or the porn or whatever it might be, it's a Band-Aid over something deeper and darker and more painful that I don't want to deal with. It's like, man, when I get to the roots of the soil, where I find the thing that's actually, causing the roots to be unhealthy and causing poison in my heart, then I can actually find a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And then don't underestimate the value in conjunction with those things that you just mentioned of finding a professional counselor.
Yeah. That's part of my story.
Yeah, for sure. And that there's no shame in going and saying, listen, I need professional help that can help me, process through the deep stuff that maybe we can't dig up without the help of someone
that's
else.
just part of, like, most men are high achiever. They have a high achiever personality, and they are external processors. So it's like, man, if you can be in a safe place where someone can ask you great questions so that you can think about things, maybe not that you haven't thought about before, but think about them in a deeper, more nuanced way. Because, again, like pastoring, at the end of the day, it's not about having all the right answers. It's about asking great questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, brother, this has been so good. I'm so great. Well, number one, I'm grateful for your friendship. I'm grateful that, you and I met last fall and that we've been growing our friendship and relationship ever since. And that you came here, we got to just hang out as brothers in Christ and then do a little ministry together.
We went to eat at
Minerva's.
Made me nervous.
But you thought, wait, you're nervous? Why should we go there then? But yeah, we had some great food together, but more importantly, great conversation, sharpening one another. So I'm just so grateful for you. I really, and we do need to end our time here, but I want to give you the opportunity. Your book that came out earlier this year, or late last year, excuse me, is when it came out, right?
This year, March.
Okay, year. Okay. So tell people, just give us a quick little kind of 30, 60 second like overview of what the book is. Obviously, you can get it on Amazon or wherever books are sold. But what's the book title and what do you really dive into?
Yeah, so it's called 7 Lies That'll Ruin Your Life, and you're really taking 7 big lies of culture and you comparing, contrasting them into what the Word says. And I share nuggets from my life, and so it's a story about me and it's a story about someone else, and it's correlating stories to the lie. And the application of the truth is where it dismantled and destroyed the lie and rebuilt a new foundation. And I'll say the big one is the last one, where it's just talking about forgiveness. Talking about forgiveness that God calls us into, in contrast to cancel culture. And as we go through the sanctification process, it's like an onion, where it's like, well, God was dealing with my lust, and all of a sudden I found myself angry. I was like, why am I angry? It's like, well, I haven't forgiven my dad.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, am I willing to forgive even if reconciliation doesn't meet my expectations?
Yeah.
Are you willing to forgive even if the person's not going to change?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's like, well, I'm not God, so I can't be autonomous over that situation. So I need to surrender, and I need to forgive, not because I'm supposed to, or not because the situation is going to change. I need to forgive because I've been forgiven. And when I don't forgive, I pay the price.
Yeah.
So I would say that's one, like that and intimacy are the two favorite chapters of the book.
Yeah, that's good. So you definitely want to check that out. And then the new resource that came out in October.
Yeah.
The P51.
Yeah.
That resource is 6 20-minute conversations basically between yourself, Zach Clinton, and Jason Van Ruler, where it really is just unpacking a lot of the stuff we just talked about here.
So P51 is based out of Psalm 51, like creating me a clean heart. So it's like, how can I have cleansing in my heart so that I can have fruit in my life and to live a fruitful life? Well, I need to remain in the vine, but also there needs to be things removed from me. And it's 6 conversations where we start at, why is porn a big deal? Like from the outside looking in, from a theological aspect, but even like from a cultural aspect. If someone is not a follower of Jesus, why would I say pornography is detrimental to the world? So we start there and we end with, conversation 5 is, finding freedom. But the 6th conversation, I think, is probably the most important. Like, how do I walk in newness?
Yeah.
How do I figure out life? I've been addicted to porn for 10 years. I've been doing whatever for so long. I've been living in sin longer than I've been living in freedom. And this living in freedom is going to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be drawn towards chaos that I, may have called comfort, but it's actually compromise. But that's where I feel safe because that's where I've been the most consistent in my life. What does that look like on a practical basis? And I think it's going to be really helpful. And, so
Yeah. So how can guys find that?
Yeah, so there's I forget the exact link,
We can
but
put
I'm
it-
sure
we
you
can
can
put
put
it
the link
in
in.
the
But,
show notes,
yeah,
yeah, for
so it's part of Ignite, which is a subset of the AACC. So AACC is the American Association of Christian Counselors, and Ignite is a twice a year in-person conference, but there's a ton of great curriculum that you can find there around like this holistic healing, mental health.
Perfect.
A lot of great stuff.
We'll
for men
put that put that in the show notes for people to find that, because it's gonna be great. So, well, brother, we're at the end of our time. At the end of every episode, we do something called the final word. Just 30 to 60 seconds of just a final word that the Lord lays on your heart. To just share with listeners and viewers as kind of a little sign off for us.
Yeah. Man, it's so funny. So I posted this on social media recently, but there was an AI generated video of Justin Bieber as a grown-up hugging himself as a kid. And I would just say to the person that didn't get the hug that they wanted or didn't hear the affirmation that they needed, as a follower of Jesus, God is looking at you and saying, son, I'm proud of you. This is my beloved son, whom I'm so pleased. And if you can see yourself, not through your accomplishments, not through trying harder, not through trying so hard to be righteous, if you can see yourself first and foremost as a son, that impacts how you live as a parent, as a husband, and as a friend, and most importantly, a follower of Jesus. So if you understand who you are, it doesn't matter who you're not.
So good. Brother, I love you. I'm so grateful for our time
man.
together. Thank you for being a guest on the Giving Life podcast and just pouring into me throughout the last 36 hours into our community here and to all you're doing for God's kingdom, but most importantly, what you're doing for your wife and your kids and who you are for them and everybody that knows you. So thanks again.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much, man.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joshua today. If you'd like to hear more from him, you can follow him on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on TikTok. You can also find his book, 7 Lies That Will Ruin Your Life, on Amazon and, of course, wherever else books are sold. Well, that's all for today. Don't forget to head to resgen.org to get yourself registered for the RESGEN Men's Summit and Date Night comedy events, and then we'll see you next time for another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others. We'll see you soon.